Good morning. Today we're going to talk about motivation and emotion, but in particular motivation and emotion as it relates to the social world. Okay? We're going to break this topic into two parts. We'll talk about social development a little bit. We've already, in the second topic there, I started to hint a little bit about Erik Erikson's stages of social development. So we'll talk a little bit more about those, get those lined up. And then we'll talk about motivation and emotion in particular as they relate to the social world. But, emotions isolated from a social context seem pretty silly to me. So let's take a look at what we got. Okay? I'm sure you must have learned about Erik Erikson's stages of social development at some point in your life. But the point is, we're not born complex, social, sophisticated creatures. Remember in my last presentation where I pulled Sigmund Freud out and I said, take a look, when a baby's born, they're born with one part of the personality, the id, and the id is both impulsive, hint, hint comes the ego, and the id is selfish, inherently a non-social creature. It's me, me, me. And it's only through socialization that the human being becomes a social creature. Okay? But ultimately, humans are born to be social creatures. That if you don't have social contact, you'll feel like something's missing. Now, we'll talk about that, I guess, more in the motivation and emotion stuff. But anyway, Erik Erikson says that children develop human beings. Now, there's children. Human beings develop through 8 stages of social development, and he called them psychosocial because when he was designing them, he did have Sigmund Freud's psychosexual theory at the top of his mind. Okay, so this didn't come from nowhere. And so, according to Erik Erikson, as people get older, they proceed through a series of stages along the left side. As you get older, you just kind of go through stages. And at each stage, you have a challenge to complete. And you can successfully or unsuccessfully complete at each stage. Now, if you're successful at one stage, that gives you a healthy groundwork for development moving forward. If you're unsuccessful at a stage, you keep moving along as you get older, but this failure will come back to haunt you later in life, okay? So clearly he had some influence from Sigmund Freud with this. So at the first stage, basic trust versus basic mistrust. That is, children need to learn this social trust, that their consistency of care, that they are taken care of, okay? That I can trust the world around me. A basic mistrust is if, there's no, in fact, here, there's this one terrible story. It was an orphanage in Iran, I think. Could have been Romania. I don't know. But it was horrible. This orphanage had just hundreds of children and like 3 caregivers. It was just the ratio was just out of control. There was no money for this. And so what happened was these babies basically they were put onto an assembly line, So the workers start at one end and change a diaper, change a diaper, change a diaper, change a diaper, all the way down the line. And then give them food, give them food, give them food, give them food. See, the problem is that when they got their diapers changed and when they were given food had no relation to when they actually needed them. All right, I'm hungry now. I ain't getting my food. So clearly, this was a fundamental failure at this stage. And the children in these orphanages, by the time they were 4 and 5 years old, were so socially blunted that they couldn't get. Nobody would adopt these children. They had no successful socialization. Real big problem where an extreme failure at this early stage just led to terrible, terrible outcomes. In the second stage, autonomy versus shame and doubt. Now, I want to be careful that, again, never forget that Erik Erikson wrote a Western perspective on social development, and autonomy is really a powerful thing. And I told you my hero was my grandmother because of her strength and independence, right? Well, that's not necessarily always true in other parts of the world. And so here Erik Erikson puts at this second stage of development a successful social development. Oh, my cat is going nuts. She just killed Alexa. But anyway, a successful development is one who is independent and strong, right? Well, in other parts of the world, Independence is sometimes seen as a bad thing, right? Because you're supposed to rely on your social network and things of this nature. So it is an interesting idea that this very idea of successful children's development may well be seen as unsuccessful in another part of the world. Initiative versus guilt, which is really the point where children begin to get direction and purpose. They begin to start things. They enjoy accomplishments. Okay, but if you don't get some independence, you just and so all of a sudden, do I feel like I can do things? I have purpose. I have a drive. Sounds very similar to the notion of motivation to me, and we'll come back on the motivation. At the fourth stage, which really is at the beginnings of school, industry versus inferiority. And obviously, this is like, can I compete? When I go into the classroom, will I compete? And, am I productive? Do I produce good stuff? Am I curious? And so what happens is the negative outcomes, obviously arising from poor performance in schools, would be, inadequacy, inferiority, lack of status, things of this nature. Okay? So, powerful stage. Come. Identity versus role confusion. Yeah, this is funky. This is like adolescence. So we find that during adolescence, the most important thing that happens is children try on different hats, okay, different roles, and so all of a sudden they're trying to figure out who will I be, all right, and nowadays adolescence is really long, okay? Adolescence goes all the way up to, God, I don't know, I've heard about 40-year-old adolescents. If you don't move out of your mom's basement, you're still an adolescent, okay? And so adolescence is like this time where who am I and moving towards, independence of your own or something. And so negative outcomes can occur. And we find, though, in this identity versus role confusion, homosexual children have a particularly hard time at this point because they're not just like, what is my role in, what direction what major will I be in college or something like this, but like, who am I in so many other ways? So it is a huge stage to start with. And we find hero worship, ideology, but group identity. Yeah, this is where parents don't really seem to have a lot of influence anymore. Ooh. Then, young adulthood. This is a point where we're supposed to have love relationships develop. This is where we have to commit. And in fact, at this point, this is where we have to sacrifice for others extremely. I'm sorry, be a parent. I'm going to tell you something. Oh, all right, some of you know. And so some of the negative outcomes of this stage can be egocentric thinking, this idea that nobody is important except me. So important that we create this intimacy and sacrifice. Oh, sacrifice. All right, in generativity versus stagnation, these are the career years, right? This is where we're parenting. And if you look from the standpoint of evolution, the whole point of human beings is to survive and reproduce. Well, yeah, reproduce and protect the offspring and get them ready to reproduce. And so that's kind of what this stage is fulfilling your evolutionary role, right? And look at the Bible. It says, "Go forth and multiply." So clearly, multiple sources have said this is kind of the point, right? Your point is to produce the children, take care of the children, get the children prepared so that they can continue the process. Okay. So in this stage, a positive outcome is this notion of generativity. You want to give back. You want to mentor. You want to work towards the common good. Okay. Negative is more stagnation, inactivity, self-centered, kind of like not working for society. But in my opinion, this last stage is the one that I'm finding to be the most crucial. And in late adulthood, we're going to perhaps, as the most important event, reflect on our life. Okay, and the two outcomes: integrity versus despair. I refuse to live my life in any way that will lead me to despair at this point of my growth. Because what we find is, if you get to this point, you look at your life and say, I was meaningful, I made a difference, I impacted people. I have a philosophy of life that essentially goes, at minimum, when I get to this stage of development, I must be able to look back on my life and say, I've given more to this world than I've taken from it. I must look at that, okay? Hopefully far more given than I've taken, but this has got to be how it works. And so I just cannot see a pursuit of money across your lifetime as being worth the despair that you may well feel once you get to this stage. All right, so moving a little bit into motivation, okay? No, what am I doing? Motivation is the next topic. Whoops. Moral development. Social development, see, this is Lawrence Kohlberg's theory of moral development. And Lawrence Kohlberg's theory of moral development in many ways is tied into the stages of social development, because morality at the earliest levels, down at the bottom there, the pre-conventional level, that's a morality of self-interest. That is to say, morality, good behavior, good moral behavior is behavior which gives me rewards or allows me to avoid punishments. Okay? The pre-conventional level of morality is the level of morality that you can teach your pets. Okay? You know, if my cat jumps up on the table and I spray him in the face with a little bit of water, my cat now has this notion jumping on the table is bad behavior, right? Okay, so good behavior is one that avoids pain and gets pleasure. Simple. Conventional morality is only possible once the individual has a sense of the larger social world. Okay, it's the morality of law and social rules and stuff. And so good behavior is one that allows me to gain approval from society or from others, like the teacher or something like that. Okay, I raise my hand in class because it makes the teacher happy. Something like this. I get approval from the teacher for doing it. At the post-conventional level, what you find is morality is really defined in terms of some larger ideal, that there is some universal truth to the world, and moral behavior is not defined by any set of laws. Okay, at the post-conventional level, there's this recognition that the current laws that we have in place are just a manifestation of some larger. The current laws we have can easily be flawed, all right? The Constitution is not the be-all and the end-all, and that's conventional level morality to be, to be a rigid, literal constitutional reader is to be at the conventional level, okay? And it's not right. You realize that even the Constitution is written as a reflection of some larger universal morality and just system. And it is written by imperfect human beings, right? But there is something more out there, okay? Wow, that seems like a whole lot of fun reading for you, okay? Enjoy that. Yeah. Okay. Now, we find, though, that Kohlberg's theory of social development really was, or this isn't Kohlberg's theory of moral development. Oh, bite my tongue. Was designed for Western samples. It really was. They went to lots of different cultures, and they did find, yeah, you have to reason at stage 1 before you can move to 2. You have to be 2 before you move to 3. Okay, something of that nature. But what happened is that when Western samples were explored, every Western sample showed at least some people using stage 3 reasoning. And by the way, I didn't say it back there, but Kohlberg says not every human being in the planet does in fact move on to stage 3 reasoning. Many, many, many do not. Okay? But when they went to tribal or folk villages, zero people were exhibiting stage 3 reasoning. And that doesn't seem right to me, because just because they're tribal and folk people and they haven't got no formal education doesn't mean they're stupid, all right? They're definitely not stupid. And so this model seems to really only apply to Western samples. Okay? So some more recent research on moral development has actually gotten very interesting. This is Schrader's model of moral reasoning. He calls it, there's 3. He says the problem that Kohlberg has is he only tapped into one of the 3 forms of morality. There's 3 different types of morality based on autonomy, community, and divinity. And we find that Kohlberg's stages really tie into autonomy. Okay? So the ethic of autonomy, as he calls it, the ethic of autonomy is this idea that right and wrong, good and bad behavior is defined by violation of autonomy. In other words, you feel an autonomy violation, and if you feel the emotion of anger, all right, that's A, autonomy, A, and anger, then that's a violation of autonomy. Somebody is edging ahead of you in line, right? Trying to sneak in. Well, we find in the United States, we have the Bill of Rights, okay? You, as an individual, have these rights. We can't take them away. That's autonomy, okay? Our entire legal system is based on autonomy. The entire moral structure that Colbert just proposed is based on autonomy. But he says, you know what? Leave the United States, go out and see the rest of the world, and check this. A community violation. Someone doesn't go to his own mother's funeral. You feel contempt, right? There's a little bit of contempt for that. And that's a community violation, says Fader. And so in this model, I mean, in westernized thinking, it's not against the law to commit a community violation, okay? It's not illegal. Okay. Well, in non-Western societies, what happens is that violations, community violations, violations of the ethic of community, are probably not going to be illegal either, but will have social punishments. That society will shun you, will block you out. You will be punished, just not in a traditional legal system. Okay? And so now we find, again, individualistic nations tend to focus on the ethic of autonomy. Collectivistic nations tend to focus on the ethic of community more. But the ethic of divinity overarches all of them. Okay? The ethic of divinity: a 70-year-old male has sex with a 17-year-old female, and you feel disgust. Okay, so if you have the emotion of disgust, you've probably violated the ethic of divinity. The ethic of divinity, in the simplest sense, might be God's law. Okay, something of that. Something it's just wrong. And so, well, why is it wrong for a 70-year-old male to have sex with a 17-year-old female? Well, let's make it 18 just to be safe and say it's not illegal, right? There's no law against it. So why not? And you're like, it's just wrong. And it's like, but why? And so if you have a hard time coming up with the reason that it's wrong, chances are it's a divinity violation. And so we find, as I said, the individualistic nations tend to use autonomy more than community. Collectivistic nations tend to use community more than autonomy, but everybody uses divinity. Within the United States, we find that the moral reasoning of evangelical Christians relies very heavily on divinity violations. And this is an interesting and troublesome component as people try to... Anyway, I will leave it at that, but I'm just going to tell you that many politicians want to take divinity violations and turn them into illegal things. And we have a nation which is based on autonomy. I mean, that is what our Constitution is fundamentally about. I'm just going to leave that morality for another day. All right, so the next section that we're going to talk about is going to be talking about motivation and emotion a little bit, so that we kind of got a handle on their relations to social behavior. Okay? All right.